Okay, good morning, everybody. I am Rick Smetanka, and I'm the partner in charge of the audit practice at Haskell & White. And today we put together a really great agenda. And a couple of you have commented this morning that one of the reasons you like coming to this conference is because you hear a lot of different things. And I think this morning's a great example of that, because this morning you will certainly hear from our expertise on accounting, but hopefully you'll learn something about the technology arena and what's happening there. We're also going to talk to you about some best governance practices, and you're going to hear about some strategic financial leadership. So I think today's agenda has just about something for everybody on it. So we hope you enjoy the program today. Just a word about Haskell & White if you don't know our firm. We have been in practice in Orange County since 1988, so we are now 36 years old. And we really are one of the few firms that focus really exclusively on the middle market. Everyone has a different definition of middle market. For us, we'll call middle market maybe that 75 to 100 million in revenue. That is really where the main focus of our firm is. And as you can see looking around the room, we have a wonderful group of nonprofit clients. And what you'll hear from us today is a strong dedication towards helping the community and helping our nonprofit clients and friends. We're also really proud because we're a great place to work. We boldly declare that. We have been honored with some awards in that area, and we really do work hard to try to be a corporate role model. And we believe that if a lot of the businesses did the little things that we do at Haskell & White, Orange County would be a much better place. So we try to inspire businesses to do more. Our clients tell us that we work with the technical competencies and professionalism as some of the larger firms, but with some of the responsiveness and some of the user-friendliness that smaller firms are known for. So we think that's a really good combination in a place like Southern California. You can see that we serve the nonprofit community by providing audits. We do single audits, of course, the 990s. And one of the things we like to bring to our clients is the perspective of working with for-profit businesses. So most of our clients are for-profit. They're commercial businesses. They're everything you see around you, from real estate to med device to biotech to manufacturing and distributions. And we believe that we learn things in those environments that would benefit our nonprofit clients. So we always try to take those ideas into our nonprofit clients as well. We volunteer for over 20 organizations. I think, Wayne, you probably have about half of those. But that's a really good number and something we're real proud of. And we're really trying to encourage our younger generations to learn why it's important to do that and why it's important to donate your talents and serve the community by leadership on a board. I think in our practice, most of the times when we meet nonprofits, they can always use another CPA on the board. There's just not enough CPAs that are proactive and serving on the board, so we're trying to encourage that. And that wasn't a joke. When firms talk about
40 nonprofits here looking for board members.
Well, I happen to know a few good CPAs, Gerald. There's a few in the room here, too. When firms talk about audit quality, firms actually have something tangible that they can show you about audit quality. All audit firms have to be reviewed by an AICPA peer review firm. So our firm does that. We're required to be reviewed once every 3 years. And we can go back as far as I can remember, and we have what we call clean reports, or really no deficiencies mentioned in our AICPA peer review reports. So that goes back probably at least a couple decades. So something we're real proud of, and again, is real evidence of the quality of our practice. The presenters that you're going to hear from today are listed in your slide deck. You can see them on the screen there. We have little QR codes there if you want to check out the resumes. I think we have to, again, thank Megan on this for not putting the resumes on the page here, because if you added up all the years of experience, I think just the first 3 would get close to 100 years of experience. I won't say Wayne has half of that one. But please do use the QR codes, and you can check out some resumes here. So to kick off our program this morning, I'm going to ask Diane Wittenberg to take the stage. Diane is a fellow UC Santa Barbara Gaucho, so please welcome Diane.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to start our morning talking about in-kind contributions. And just to make sure everyone's awake, hold on, we're going to start with a polling question. So for people in the room, we're just going to do it with a show of hands. So how frequently does your organization receive gifts in kind? Let me see with a show of hands. Regularly? Okay, that's a good amount. Occasionally? Rarely? And never have received any. Okay, Rick, you don't work for a nonprofit, so nobody's going to make a donation to us. So with that, then we're going to jump right in and tell you everything you wanted to know and maybe didn't want to know about gifts in kind. So there's a lot of different kinds of in-kind contributions, as you know. It can be anything from an equity security to food and supplies and household goods, or a building, or a vehicle, or a work of art, a collection item. And those all come with some different rules and regulations. So we're going to walk through each of them. Whoops. So we're going to just start off with the basic that non-cash contributions generally get recognized as revenue measured at fair value in the period received. But then, of course, there's exceptions. So start off with the basic rule, then I'm going to tell you all the times it doesn't apply. So first, with donated services only get recognized as revenue if they meet two criteria. One is it needs to be providing a service with a specialized skill, and the other is you would have otherwise had to go out and purchase that service. So for example, if you have a big litigation case that your organization is trying to get through, and you have a board member who's an attorney, and they help you through that case and handle it for you, well then that does qualify as donated revenue, because one, it's a specialized skill, and two, we definitely would have had to have purchased it if they didn't help us through that. On the flip side, if you have an event that you normally don't have music for, but you have a friend of a friend who's a musician and they come and play music at your event, that doesn't qualify because you wouldn't have otherwise gone out and purchased that. So the fact that they came and played music at your event, that's nice. And it was a specialized skill, but you wouldn't have otherwise gone out and purchased it. So that's not going to qualify for recognizing as revenue. And then, of course, there's always the immateriality. If the item has no value or it's immaterial, of course, you don't need to record it. And then the other exception that we're going to walk through, and this gets pretty involved, it's got a few slides all to itself, is collection items. So works of art, historical treasures, anything that can be considered a collection item, those have their own rules, and we'll go through those on the next slide here. So you do not need to recognize a donation of a collection item as revenue if it meets all three of these criteria. One is it's held for public exhibition or research or education, somehow furthering your mission, not for financial gain. And then two is it needs to be protected, preserved, and cared for. And three is you need to have made an organizational policy. You have to formally adopt a policy consistently that says that any proceeds from the sale of these collection items are either going to be used to buy a new collection item or to protect and preserve your existing collections. So if it meets all three of these, then you don't have to record it as revenue. And the reason for doing this, a lot of the situations I've seen is some of these are just so hard to value. You know, how do you value? I'm the audit committee chair at the Science Center at the Cube, and that big old Boeing rocket spaceship that sits out in front, that was donated. How do you value that? I don't know. They asked me, and I said, maybe make this election. So then you don't have to worry about valuing it. So that's one of the common reasons somebody would make this policy election is those kinds of things get very difficult to value. And then it's going to require some special disclosures, and we'll go through that later in this presentation. So aside from collection items, how do you value your donated in-kind contributions? Well, it depends on what they are, and there's different guidelines and different sources you can look to depending on what it is that got donated. So, of course, if it's like a gift card or something like that, that's pretty easy, whatever the value of the gift card. If it's an auction item, you immediately auction it off at your gala, then you're just going to record it at whatever the amount is you got at your gala. Pretty easy. If it didn't sell at your gala and you are still holding it, well, then you need to look at one of these other methods that we're going to look at today. So you can look at comparable things on Amazon or eBay. For clothing and household items, Salvation Army has some donation valuation guides, and TurboTax has its deductible valuation guide. If you're a food bank and you often get food donated, you probably subscribe to the annual valuation studies that they have. There's bigger ticket items that you might want to get appraisals for. If you are the first item, artwork, jewelry, antiques, those may fall under your collection items that we just talked about, and you may not want to value those. But if you do, that's probably one that might require an appraisal because that's more difficult to get a value for. Same thing with land and buildings. Boats and vehicles, maybe look to Kelley Blue Book. Services, you can look to prior purchases or what their standard billing rates are. Bureau of Labor Statistics might have some billing rates, but there's lots of valuation sources. But I caution you, when you look at these valuation sources, make sure that it's a good source. So when I say a good source, don't look at a distress sale, a sale that wasn't between, with an arm's length transaction, if it was related parties or enforced liquidation or a very old transaction or something that's not really identical or similar asset to what you have. Make sure it's based on a transaction in an active market. So peel back the onion a little bit when you're valuing these. Don't just grab the first thing you see. Look at a few different sources and look at the underlying criteria. Make sure it is a really good, valid source and not one of these that might trip you up. Brings us to our next polling question. Does your organization currently have a standard process for reporting gifts in kind? Again, I'm going to do a show of hands in the room. So how many say, yes, we have a well-documented process, we're good? Oh, that's a good number, good number. B, somewhat, but it could be improved. Okay, a decent number there too. And then, no, we have no policy, we just do case by case as it comes. Okay, we have a few of those. And D, not applicable, we never get in-kind donations. Okay, so we're going to walk through what a policy should include, and what that should look like to help you fine-tune whatever policy you have. So let's start with recording those in-kind donations. We did say, you at the beginning on the first slide, I said, you record them at fair value, in revenue on the date received. To go a little bit further, you want those to be in a separate revenue account. Please don't lump in-kind contributions in the same revenue account as your cash contributions, the same way you wouldn't put your cash contributions in the same account as your program revenue, right? You have to track those separately. In-kind contributions need to be tracked separately too. There's separate disclosures. As we talked about, there's some policy elections. So keep it clean, make in-kind contributions its own separate account. And then the expense side should follow whatever the functional category is. So back in my previous example with the attorney donating services to get you through your litigation case, we know that's going to be revenue, right? Because it qualified, it didn't meet the exception. And the expense side would go to professional services because that's the functional expense category it falls in. So how does this get presented on your statement of activity? What does it look like? So it has to be its own separate line item. Contributed services and materials, and again, this is why you want to have it in a separate GL and track it separately, because it's going to have its own line item on your statement of activities. And similarly, on your statement of cash flows, if you think about it, when you're coming up with your cash flows provided by or used in operating activities, you start with your changes in net assets, right? And if you recognize these, they increased your changes in net assets, but it's not cash, they're in kind. So we have a separate line item to subtract those out in order to come down to your cash provided by operating activities. So again, it's always got to be separately on its own line. And we're going to talk about some of the disclosures now that goes along with that. So we're going to take that line item that's on your statement of activities, and we're going to bust it up and disaggregate it in your note by category. So whether it's equipment or services or real estate, it's going to have its own line item within your notes. So it might all be on one line item on your statement of activity, but then in your notes, we're going to bust it up and disaggregate it, and we're going to talk about these 4 things, characteristics that need to be disclosed on each one of those items. So first, you want to talk about whether those contributed items were monetized or utilized. So if it was utilized, what program was it utilized for, or was it administrative? If it was monetized, you have a policy about monetizing that. So for example, you might not want to be in the business of holding land. And so somebody contributed land, and you have a policy, and we'll get to what your policy on in-kind contributions is going to look like later, but your policy might say, yeah, you can donate land to us, but we're not going to hold it. That's something that we're going to immediately monetize. So if you have that policy, that would be part of your disclosures. You also want to disclose any restrictions that the donors put on any of those contributed items. You want to describe how you valued those. And for any services, you want to say which programs or activities those services were used in and the amount that was recognized in revenue. So then collections has its own set of disclosures, just like it has its own set of rules. So if your organization does not recognize and capitalize its collections, you're going to have a line item on the face of your statement of activities that says collections. There won't be a dollar amount there. There's just going to be a note reference. But you are going to have a line item on your statement of, did I say statement of activities? Statement of financial condition. You'll have a line item that says collections with a note reference. And then on your statement of activities, you're going to have separate line items showing any insurance proceeds that you got from those collection items, any purchases you made of collection items, or any sales you made of collection items, showing that cash coming in or out of its respective net asset category. So even though you're not capitalizing that as an asset on your balance sheet, if you did have cash transactions for those collection items, you have to show those coming in and out of net assets. But remember, it's going to be subject to that policy. So if you did sell something, you're going to use those proceeds to what? Either buy a new collection item or care for your existing items. But that doesn't mean you'll never have any cash items. So in those cases, it will flow through. You'll see if you do have cash transactions on those, like from insurance proceeds or something like that, you will see it flow through your statement of activities. Oh, on that last slide, if you have a policy that you do capitalize, you will obviously have that on your statement of financial condition, again, with the note referenced with more information. So other issues on in-kind contributions. As you all know, I'm sure you all have policies of writing acknowledgments. What do those acknowledgement letters include for an in-kind? So for a cash contribution, your acknowledgement is going to say the value. Thank you for donating $100. For an in-kind contribution, you never provide the fair value back to the donor. Do not put that on your acknowledgement. That's the donor's responsibility to figure that out for their own tax purposes, not ours. So yes, we come up with a value, but that's for our own reporting purposes, not to give to the donor for their tax reporting purposes. So for our charitable contribution acknowledgements of in-kind, we're going to state that we're a 501c3. We're going to talk about the date of the donation, what kind of non-cash contribution we got, the fact that no goods or services were given in exchange for it, and then we're going to be silent as to the fair value. We also want to never even issue that acknowledgement letter if it's for donated services or facilities. And the reason for that is services and facilities have their own complicated tax deduction rules, different than other types of contributions. And so we don't want to go there. You can still write a thank you letter, but it should not take the form of a regular charitable contribution acknowledgement letter. There's just, like personal services, like a lot of us volunteer on boards. Is that time, can I say, oh, my billing rate times this number of hours I spent on a board? No, that's not deductible. And so there's certain things, services and facilities, there's just more rules behind them. So don't go there. Don't issue your acknowledgement for those. Okay, so best practices on in-kind contributions. First, we want to have a gift acceptance policy. You want to define what types of donations are eligible. Back to what I was saying before, like, do we want to accept just anything? Are we in the business of holding land? Or maybe we'll accept it, but then our policy will be to turn around and monetize it and sell it. But you have to think about that as an organization from a strategic point of view. I know nobody wants to turn down any contributions, but some things become more of a hassle than they're worth. So implement a gift acceptance policy, what you'll accept, what you won't, how they'll be valued, and how they'll be recorded, and will they be utilized or monetized. You also want to make sure you have a system for tracking these donations and for your documentation. So create a package for each in-kind contribution you get. It should say how it was valued. You want to include any appraisals or research you did to come up with that value. Attach the acknowledgement letter if there was one, but you've got to retain that for your records. So with that, does anyone have any questions on anything having to do with in-kind donations? We'll have more Q&A. Oh, yes?
You mentioned that the non-cash contributions don't disclose the value of any type of non-cash contribution.
I'm sorry, can you
I thought with stock securities you would.
say, can you repeat the, oh, you've got a microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, the slide said on non-cash contributions, don't say the value of what the contribution is, but a stocks gift is a non-cash that you would disclose.
So the stock gift is, the question was on a stock gift, can you say the value? Because that's pretty clearly readily available. So I was kind of going general and just saying non-cash. But that's for non-financial, and stock is a financial. It might be non-cash, but it's not non-financial. So for that, you can, yes. Yes.
Standard is you provide the donor the median value of the stock on the day it was given to you. Standard is on the day the stock you provide the median value. If you hold it 3 days and the value goes up, it has nothing to do with the donor.
Correct. You value, so his question or statement was you value it on the day you got it. So if you got donated stock on Monday and you happen to be writing the letter on Friday, you don't use Friday's value, you use Monday's value. Any other questions, comments, observations? Okay, there will be another Q&A at the end if anybody thinks of anything else, but with that, I'm going to hand it over to David.
All right. My name is David Buchanan, and I'm a partner at DeLapp out of Lake Oswego up in Oregon, and I also serve as Haskell & White's Chief Security Officer. So I am happy to be here in person this year. Last year, I got to do this remotely, and it's just a little different. I can't see if anyone's fallen asleep. And this I can get a good read on kind of the vibe of where everybody's at today. So today we got a conversation on, and I want it to be more of a conversation, on artificial intelligence, which is, I know, incredibly broad and incredibly hyped, especially right now. So not a formal question, it's not a polling question, but just get a show of hands. How many of you are really interested in using AI in any of its forms, in some form or another, in your organization right now? Lots of double hands, okay. How many of you are, I don't want to go anywhere near it with a 20-foot pole? Okay, there's a few, all right. Well, let's see if we can navigate that a little bit today and maybe provide some comfort and some better understanding of what you can get out of leveraging AI, and maybe some cautionary tales and some challenges you might face and things you want to think about before diving in, if you haven't already. So let's go ahead and go into, I guess, a polling question. We just kind of asked about this, but let's do it. Is your nonprofit currently utilizing AI technology in any of its operations? Hands for yes. Okay. And hands for no. Mixed. And how about no, but we plan to in the near future? A few. And I think there were some hands that were, I'm just gonna, will not go with this. So let's look at some components. There are more components to artificial intelligence than these three. I selected these three just because they're going to provide you the most value as you're understanding what AI is and what it can do for your organization. So machine learning, natural language processing, and predictive analytics. Machine learning is really just having, you're teaching the computer how to interpret and understand data and respond to data with minimal human interaction. So I look at it as, if you have any Star Trek fans here, of which I am one, your early model of Data the android. You're training Data to understand what a joke is. And throughout the Star Trek series, his jokes were dry because you see a very low trajectory of him understanding what a joke is. But he was given examples, right? So with machine learning, the model that you're developing is only as accurate as the data set that you're providing it. So the more data, the quality of data that you're feeding a model, or the machine learning algorithm in this case, the more accurate interpretations you're going to get out of it. So we'll talk about this a little bit later as well. The old adage of trash in, trash out, good data in, good data out applies here significantly. You want to make sure you pay careful attention to the quality of your data. If you have poor data management, you're not going to get very good use, and you'll get very inaccurate use of interpretations made with any AI models. All right, natural language processing. Any level of understanding or experience with natural language processing? Not so much? So who here has used or ever uses or likes to use assistants such as Siri, Cortana, Alexa, Hey Google, okay? If you have, you are working with natural language processing. So NLP is just an acronym of many, because we like to have that in tech. It seems like every industry does. It's how we teach the machine to interpret both verbal language and written language. And that takes hours and hours and hundreds of hours, thousands of hours of audio. I mean, think about when these assistants first came out, and you would have to repeat yourself how many times to get, hey Siri, turn the lights off. I might actually do that to my home right now, so I'm not going to say that again. See? Sorry, Joanne, the lights are off. I'll probably get a text. Didn't plan that. Thank you. That is way more accurate than when it first came out. So natural language processing. These work hand in hand. You can't really have really good quality machine learning without natural language processing, because all of the data we receive, whether it's recorded calls from conversations with donors or on hotlines or training modules that we use to train our teams, it's language. And then how about the written piece? So we've got written comments, written feedback, written emails, donor letters, letters that go out in the mail. All of that we need a way to process. And then, of course, the big key, which you all probably are most interested in, would be predictive analytics. And that builds off of machine learning and natural language processing. You have these two, and you start looking at what can I do with this data. So instead of having a team, you're still going to need that team, but we're looking at what's the highest and best use of the team's time. Now you can potentially provide them a virtual assistant to look at how can I get through this enormous mound of data. I had a conversation previously this morning with Jared talking about some situations, experiences of data sets where it might have taken thousands of hours to go through and mine and interpret a data set, just using analysts, human time, human hours. Whereas now with AI, and AI is again a broad term, you might be able to do that same analysis in 24 hours or even a couple of days. You're still significantly saving time, right? You're still going to have your team looking at the results and looking at, hey, does this make sense? You know your data set, but does this ring true with what data you're providing and the forecast, the projections that are coming out of that model? You're still going to need to do that. But one of the most exciting areas that we can use AI is looking at predictive analytics. I'm going to pause before going on to the next slide. Any questions or clarifications or, hey, what about this that you want to ask before we jump into the next? Scanning, yes.
So which category does something like ChatGPT fall into?
So ChatGPT is actually going to work on all three. So it's got components where you can verbally ask ChatGPT questions. So it's interpreting language, both written and verbal. You can ask it to predict based on its data set. And again, data set is very important. If you ask the free version of ChatGPT, it's going to be the public data set. And we'll talk about bias and some other things that we need to be aware of. But it actually is using all of this. The machine learning aspect has already been built into ChatGPT because those models, their learning models, made use of machine learning. Does that answer your question? And just to repeat the question, because I didn't, we just were talking about what components does ChatGPT fall under? And it really is all of them. Any other questions? All right. Polling question. Which area of AI applications are you most interested in learning about today? Hands for enhanced donor engagement. Okay, 6, 7. How about personalizing communications? 4, 5, okay. Optimizing fundraising strategies. Okay. Streamlining operational processes. Hey, okay, now we're getting some steam. How about analyzing data for decision making? All right, the last two seem pretty popular. Good. I want to spend a bit more time on this slide. Ethics of AI and how it impacts society and how it impacts our use. AI, when you provide a new staff a data set, they at least have the worldview that they were raised with. They have context. They can make decisions based on what they know to be true, or false, right or wrong, moral compass, you name it. AI learns from its data set, which is both good and tricky. You got to be very careful about bias when it comes to your data set. If you have a selection, let's say, of donors, and you want to ask an AI bot questions like, which of these donors are most likely to give to this program? And your population of donors is very limited. You're likely going to have a bias, just an innate bias in that data set, because it's not talking about all the donors out there. It's talking about your specific set of donors, and it might give you not necessarily false, but a very limited view, projection of the answer that you're looking for. When we look at data sets that are used for hiring, you want to make sure that you're monitoring the AI and how you use it and the data that goes in there to ensure that certain demographics aren't being unjustly provided more credit in the hiring process than others. Because again, the AI is not looking at that. It's just, here's data that I have, here's the response. It's our job to oversee that and make sure that we're not leveraging it without oversight. If you leverage it without oversight, there's a huge opportunity for a lot of biased decisions to be made. And of course, we're human, and humans have bias as well, so we need to have that discussion. It takes that ongoing discussion of what are we using this for, what's our desired outcome, and just asking questions openly of what could the biases be, and what type of control processes do we have in place to ensure that our use of AI is we're doing the best we can to limit negative bias from influencing our decisions. Any questions on AI bias? AI bias. So, data privacy, we don't need to spend too much time on this one. Data privacy is going to be pretty much the same as you are already used to. You collect a lot of data. And companies, organizations vary from saying, we're going to go from all data we collect is confidential, the end, period. We don't share it, we don't publicize it, done. And there's definitely use cases and positions behind that. Or you might have a stance of, well, it's confidential, but we have a very loose policy around that. Let's maybe get a show of hands. How many of you have a policy at your organization for how you handle donor data? Okay. How many of you wish you had a policy? Okay. Brave few, all right. This is vital because there are some donor demographics really value their privacy. Like for me, I don't mind if someone says, oh yeah, David gave X dollars here, that's fine. But at some point, the high net worth individuals tend to value their privacy more. The higher wealth you have, you also tend to be a target. Not just for scams, for more intense phishing capability, trying to get credentials for banking. It becomes more important for many to keep their information out of the public eye and have control over how it's disclosed. So not just from a regulatory standpoint, if we want to be compliant with keeping data secure and private, but also for maintaining the trust of your donor group, you want to make sure you have a policy. And not just the policy, do we actually then have controls that actually enforce our policy and make it easy for us to say, yeah, if I come in and say, hey, how's my data protected? You can say, well, we have a policy. This is what it says. These are the controls we have in place to protect your data. And for many, do we have an opt-out? If I fill in a form online, okay, I'd like more information about your organization. Is there an opt-out if I don't want my information to be automatically put into your email cycle? Just things that you want to consider. Taking into the AI piece is there might be individuals that do not want their data to be leveraged by AI tools. And it might depend on what type of tool you're using. Is it a tool, an AI tool that's private, it's limited to your organization's data set, or is it a tool that you're feeding data into and it's shared with a public repository of data? For instance, ChatGPT, if you're using the public version, that's working off of public data and some private data sets that OpenAI has. If you use a custom GPT, or with any of the other providers, a custom module of that, you're feeding in your own data to that in a sandbox, and it's not being shared with other organizations, as long as you trust the privacy policy of the company that is providing you the tool, that's a separate conversation. But privacy is, again, important here, and you need to have a policy with how you're going to leverage it, and that policy then drives how you're going to implement or use AI tools in your environment. Because some of these tools are not going to be available to just be limited to use in your data set. So if you have a policy that says we won't commingle our own donor data with public data sets, that tool you probably shouldn't be using. Transparency. This one's pretty straightforward. I don't think most people don't have an issue with you using an AI tool, but they sure want to know, they like to know how you use it, the why. If I'm a donor and I'm supporting your organization, usually, not just for the tax benefit, usually I care about your mission, right? Hopefully. So anything that helps you drive your mission forward effectively, if it helps you leverage every dollar that I put in, if you're using AI as a force multiplier, that's great. I see that as a huge benefit. But I'd like also to know, how are you controlling your use of it? How are you ensuring that it's accurate, that you're ensuring that it's keeping the public good in mind? We're talking about AI bias. Having transparency in how you use your tools, that's an important thing to consider when looking at AI. For instance, today's presentation, I'm being transparent. I use AI for editing. When I look and build my presentation, yes, I have my wife review it. My wife's an OR nurse, and she brings a unique perspective of, she's used to having geeky terms in a presentation. So she'll tell me, like, hey, you should probably define that, But I also then have an AI tool go through my presentation and just look at, hey, I want to make sure, does this flow? Am I defining things? Does it make sense? Framework. That's how I use it currently. There are examples of folks and stories shared earlier that will use AI or ChatGPT to write something and automatically post it out to the internet without review. Probably foresee there being some concerns there. Think about if you had a staff that you've charged with, or volunteer that you've charged with writing some letters to your donors. Would you review what they wrote? Or have someone review it? Hopefully. You want to make sure that it's in line with the messaging and the mission of your organization. Same thing. If you use an AI tool to at least use it as a copywriter. Drafting statements, make sure you review what it says, because it's only as good as the data set it's working off of. It could be old data, it could be incomplete data, and it also could be inaccurate data. Any questions before we move on? Yes, please.
What kind of tool do you use to review a presentation?
So I use a custom GBT. So I have a custom module that runs off of my own computer, and then I have it feed through my PowerPoint or Word document, and then I ask it questions. So it responds off of my data, and if I use, for instance, if I were to reference, like I will reference in one later slide, some of the studies that came out of St. Jude's. So I pull the PDFs of those articles, and I put those in as well, and then I'm like, hey, do my statements line up? Yeah. I like to run things local, especially if it's going to be off of any proprietary data. Any other questions? Okay. I'm going to focus on really 2 success stories with one organization here. There are plenty more. The 2 that I like to focus on here are with St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, 2 areas that really drove their mission forward. The first set is they leveraged machine learning, if you recall, a component of AI, to mine through a massive amount of donor data. And their goal was to discover what methods they were using from an advertising and outreach standpoint were most effective at engaging donors and engaging active donor responses to not just increase donations, but to increase interaction. Like, how many responses are we getting from a message that goes out? Whether it's physical media, email, phone calls, what's our response rate? And in that study for them, they discovered that stories resulted within their data set the highest donor feedback and donor increasing. So they used that data, that information, so their own data set, they came out with that, and they used their same ad budget with Google Ads, leveraging, did I just change something? I did. Leveraging that response to say, hey, we're going to use the same budget, and we're going to be able to increase donor engagement, and they were. And that's important to track. If you're going to leverage AI to do things, you want to track success outcomes. Like, you define, what do we want to see? What's the desired outcome? Did it happen? Because if it didn't, you need to retune and figure out if it's going to work or not. In this case, they were able to do that. So one example of use it to mine data, which could have been done by humans, could have been done by a team, but they were able to do it much faster with some analysts overseeing their AI tool to mine that data and say, hey, let's work with marketing to create a campaign that focuses on stories. Which stories provided the most feedback? Let's focus on those stories. And then based on the donors that care about those stories, let's make sure they hear those stories, providing the right message through the right channel at the right time. And the second side of this would be on their treatment, their research lab side. And you can go to the Joe Lab under stjude.org. They have some good information here about how they've leveraged machine learning, that they're using it to study and develop individual treatment for cancer patients. They have an enormous data set. And they can pull from data and look at what treatments have the most success rate. And by success, we're not just mean, hey, cancer goes into remission, we're good. It could mean we're seeing extended life expectancy. It could mean less side effects, less intrusive side effects, better quality of life. And they're able to glean that data and focus treatments based on, well, for a child in this range, this seems to be the most successful. And then get that faster and provide more personalized treatment plans. Again, that's one example, but data's data. So if you think about, you have a question and you have a population of data, it's a way to use these tools to get responses out of that data set faster. So I wanted to list, there's a couple of names you're probably familiar with. So ChatGPT, of course. Colossian is an organization that allows you to create a virtual avatar. And for instance, if I had a green screen background, they would record, do an hour or two session to get my movements, my elocution, how I move my hands, how my face moves. It's recorded. And they create a pretty darn good virtual avatar that looks and sounds like David. Now, it's licensed for me. There's of course the danger of, well, someone else could make a deep fake. Yes, that still exists. But imagine if I wanted to be able to provide a lot more personalized responses. But I didn't want to have to go to a studio room to record every single response. I can write my personalized notes then and give it to my virtual avatar, who will, word for word, accurate based, it's going to sound a little different. It's not quite Data from Star Trek, not quite 100% human, but it sounds really good. And it's an area that maybe it's not something you want to explore, but it's an area that you can explore. Again, a force multiplier of time. Donor search, which Jared pointed out earlier, and I appreciate that. This is a good part of saying the tool is only good as your data set. So donor search helps you pair with donors. But it's not going to be all the donors that are out there. It's only going to be donors that are participating and have their data available in that system. So you're likely not going to get a lot of the high net worth individuals that are in there, or more private families or trusts. That probably won't be in donor search. So you just have to keep in mind, my use of this tool is limited by its data set. Synthesia, Canva, Bard, all just different tools, and there's more out there that you can leverage. These are just, if you want to dabble, dip your feet in the AI waters and see what it can do, start small. Any questions so far? Okay. No one's asleep yet. We're okay. We're hanging in there. All right. Implementing AI. This doesn't have to be complicated, but it's important we go kind of at methodical steps. Look at identifying opportunities, data management, selecting our tool, and then pilot projects. Like with anything, you want to be able to fail small and fail fast so you can learn. So for your first pilot project, don't choose something big. Choose something relatively small that you can get quick feedback for, some proof of concept capabilities that can see, is this going to be useful for our organization? First off is identifying opportunities. You want to think about, I like about what do people complain about? Every Thursday I have to run this report. There's a lot of monotonous, iterative data entry, same thing over and over again, but I have to do it. Someone's got to do it. That's probably something that could be automated, or maybe we can leverage AI to help redirect that person's time to a more highest and best use. That would be, I hear, complaints equal opportunity. That might be a business opportunity for you to look at. If we're interested in donor engagement, have that be your bucket header and start defining, well, what does that mean to us? Do we want to have X percentage response rate when we send out mailers, or when we send out email, or when we send out any campaign? What are we looking for? What are we looking to achieve? I also equate this category of identifying opportunities with, if anyone's ever done any software development or been involved with that, to identifying business requirements. We don't just go build something to build it, although that can be fun. We want to identify what is our desired outcome. What are we trying to achieve? And then based on that, we're going to look at data management. Because again, the tool is only going to be as good as your data. So you probably have a lot of data right now. My question will be for you all, for a show of hands, how many of you are confident that the data set you currently have is, let's just say, fairly well organized and accurate. Okay, opportunity. How about if we set, let's say, 70% of it at least, let's say 70% is fairly clean and accurate. Any more hands? Okay, a couple. This is probably your biggest opportunity here. We don't want to skimp on time when it comes to cleaning your data. Because if your data is out of date, if your data is inaccurate, if you have correct addresses, names, demographics incorrect, the questions that you ask an AI model are going to be very much negatively influenced by the quality of your data. So all of this to say, when you look at the 3 buckets of opportunity identification, data management, and then tool selection, likely the biggest section that you'll spend your time on is ensuring your data is cleaned up. And it's worth spending time cleaning your data early on. Not cleaning your data now creates technical debt, something that, hey, we're just going to get something out there, but it will cause you more challenges in the future and cost you more to go back and clean it up in the future than it would if we just spent time cleaning it up now. So be thinking about that too. Any questions or concerns on data management? It probably even won't be you all doing the data cleanup piece, but I would hope maybe you're involved with it at least. All right, tool selection. This actually becomes the easy one because you've clearly defined, or somewhat clearly defined, what you're looking to achieve. Your data's relatively clean, and now you're just going to look at what tools can I plug in and test with this. And maybe you're going to pilot, maybe it's a custom GPT that you run locally. Maybe it's Colossian. Maybe it's another tool of the many out there. And the goal of this pilot project is to see if it'll help you meet your objectives that you've defined. Easy as that. But keeping it as a simple project plan, that way, if step 3 here, tool selection, you pilot the project, it doesn't meet your objectives. Now you can at least define, well, what went wrong? Did we have issues with the data? Or did the tool not behave properly? Was it the wrong tool to use? You can quickly retool, refine, go back, select a different tool to leverage, test again. Okay. No more questions. All right. We're going to go into building AI skills and capacity. Does anyone have any AI experts in their organization today? That's normal. Because I wouldn't say AI is such a growing area of expertise that even those that we consider AI experts at times would not even consider them AI experts themselves. They're just pioneers. It's a new space that's growing fast. Yes, machine learning's been around, but it's rapidly developing. So the beautiful thing about where we're at today is think about all the online learning capabilities that you have right now. Whether it's LinkedIn Learning, any of the massively online coursework, Coursera, think any of those opportunities. You have a lot of ways to consume knowledge. You have a lot of ways to engage with staff or identifying someone in your organization that is most interested. And I would shy away from picking the person who, you know what? Nancy's the most tech savvy in the organization. Let's just have her do it. Because that might work out fine, but you want to make sure that that person actually has an interest. Because if they have the interest, they're going to be more excited about actually learning this information and figuring out, oh, how can this actually, they care about your organization, hopefully. They're interested in the topic, and they're going to care about how can we make this work for our organization. Training, lots of opportunities online for training. There's also courses usually available locally, professional certification capability that you can look at. Identifying the people that will be needing to upskill for you to use this. You can outsource expertise, but I recommend not looking at outsourcing completely because you can't outsource responsibility. It's your risk. having somebody in-house that at least is comfortable with the terms is important. Collaborating, this is vital. Not just talking about collaboration within your organization, but with other organizations, other nonprofits, with for-profits, with the organizations you might be getting data with or sharing data with if you have a data sharing agreement. How are they, if they're cleaning data before it gets to you, what are they doing? Having a good line of open communication to identify what is the quickest route for us to get to a successful implementation. And then adoption. How are we actually going to use it? We pilot the program. Maybe your pilot goes fabulously. Hey, gave us some good feedback. We're able to leverage it. Got some good predictive forecasts. We're going to try that out with our marketing plan, our outreach plan. But we haven't adopted it yet. Now we have interest because the proof of concept worked. So we've got interest. The board's on board. What do we do now? Are we going to set a policy? Just like you want to have policies in other areas, for how to treat in-kind, you would have the same thing for treating AI. You want to have a policy for how you leverage it. And who is allowed to make the decision to, hey, we're going to implement this, and we're approving its use. So, it's important to be, you don't have to be overly formal about it, but have a policy, and it shows intention. It shows intention. You're being intentional about its usage, which, as you know, if Murphy's Law, if something goes wrong, or if, computers are great when they work, same thing happened with models, they're not perfect. You want to be able to make sure that you can go back and, hey, we're following our policy. If this happens, this is how we go back and correct our course. All of that to say, you have a significant amount of opportunity that you can look at leveraging. And I'm going to not say AI, I'm going to say machine learning. Because it's far more than ChatGPT or generative AI, which is the hype right now. I can have it create a picture of me riding a horse that looks like Lord of the Rings. And I might have 6 fingers on one hand, but hey, it works. That's fun, but how does that help our business? How does that help our organization? The opportunity here is really in data mining and creating forecasting capability. Freeing you up to actually use the human aspect, the human skills that are really what sets us apart. People tend to help people they like. I tend to donate to people that I can see they have a passion for what they do. That's where you find your win. So if we can leverage technology in the areas that free you up to be human, that's where I would focus. And that being said, try not to get bought in with the hype. It's not Skynet. It's not Skynet. It may be someday, who knows? But it's not. Remember, we built it. Humans built it. It provides feedback off of data that, where does the data come from? Humans, for the most part. Metadata comes from systems designed by humans. So just take everything with a grain of salt. You're going to hear a lot of news, pros and cons. Just think about, how does this impact me? How does this impact our mission? How does this impact our donors? Any questions before I wrap up? We're going to be going to a break soon, so now's your time. Anyone less interested in machine learning and AI now than you were 20 minutes ago? Okay.
I think it's a great thought on the fact that people are so scared of it. It's just a tool. If you use a tool, it frees you up to do the important things. It's a great point.
Think about the automotive industry when robotics really took off. Yes, there was some job replacement, but it focused now, you needed technicians to understand how to fix the robots, maintain the robots, set them up, manage the designs. It just changes where our attention goes. Anyone else? Yes?
So my question is, you talked about the security of AI and how, where that data goes. I'm just curious as to how you have not included blockchain in that discussion because of the immutability of the data that goes into the blockchain.
So the question is, with the security of data that is being fed into an AI model, how do you, if you do, include or incorporate blockchain technology, which by nature of being blockchain has immutability, which means it's proof by itself. You know, if it's changed, you would see it on the blockchain. The answer is it depends on the solution you use. So a lot of folks will use change management tools for data that goes into their data sets now, that any data commit goes through this change management tool, and if the commit is approved, it's added to their blockchain. So that tells you that I have an authoritative reference of any changes made to my data set. That is a use case. Most of these tools that are available right now are not publicizing heavy or any use of blockchain technology into their core tools. Would we want to see that in the future? Yes, and it depends. I see it more as blockchain has a great opportunity to help us control the data that's in our data set from a bias standpoint, but also controlling who has access to it. Yes, question?
Kind of building off of that, you talked a little bit about security of data.
Yes.
Of the companies that you're using for your AI.
Correct.
So for a nonprofit that might not have a, probably doesn't have a big IT department, what kind of questions should they be asking and looking at to see this data privacy securities of the company they're hiring to process their AI?
Good question. So the question is, how do we look at, as a nonprofit, the security of an organization that we might be engaging to provide some type of tool that we could leverage? And my response would be really, you should have that company go through, hopefully you have some form of vendor management or vendor management process. Maybe you're asking them for a SOC 2 report. For those who know the terminology, SOC 1 is more focused on internal controls of financial reporting. That's financial driven. You know, if you use ADP for payroll, they probably have a SOC 1 for you. SOC 2 is more about data privacy, availability, security. That's something they might have. They might not have it yet because it's a industry, it's a market-driven report, if you will. It's not mandated. You might ask if they have an ISO 27001 report. If it's a younger company, chances are they might not have that either yet. You might use a standardized security questionnaire checklist. If anyone's had to fill one of those out, they're not exactly fun. And just a cautionary note, if you're going to have a vendor fill out a security questionnaire, it's only useful if you actually can interpret the responses of the questionnaire. If you use it to just check the box, yep, we got the questionnaire done, it's kind of like Linus from Snoopy with his blanket. That thing's ratty. It's not going to keep him warm. It just makes him feel comfortable. Does that answer your question? Good. Anyone else? Yes?
I always hate to be the person who gives a comment instead of a question and a Q&A.
Please.
But I was reading yesterday that some grant writers are saying that there are now grant applications that in the grant or the application agreement at the end will say, I agree that AI was not used in this application. And I've never come across one like that myself, but I was wondering if you've heard of that trend at all, because it seems like it could really open a can of worms, because even something like Grammarly that people might use for spelling and grammar would be
it's technically an AI.
Machine learning, I'm assuming.
Yeah. That's a good point. So the comment is, as organizations and other companies might start putting clauses in grant applications or contracts saying by signing and completing this application, you're confirming that no AI was used in completing the application or form. I have not seen that being prevalent at all yet. Doesn't mean it might change. It's obviously out there in some form. I don't see that as being the long-term, that doesn't provide to me any benefit to the grant givers. What I would like to see instead is, it's a transparency piece. Instead of saying you say you did not use it, tell me how it was used in writing this grant. That provides me more information. Like, if you spent the time to actually write the grant and you used Grammarly to spell check, which again, you could use Microsoft Word to spell check, and technically that's using a dictionary and machine learning. So it's an interesting comment.
Yeah, I guess we'll see in
Yeah,
5 to 10 years.
that's one of those, let's wait and see. Anything else? Time? All right. Overtime, sorry folks. Break time.
And we're going to be speaking on internal controls and fraud next, so you will not want to miss these topics. We know why everybody really came out today. Okay, looks like everybody is about back, so thank you. So we are going to kick off this next session, and one of the ways, one of the reasons we do the polling questions is we do have a very nice online presence participating in our conference today. So thank you if you're joining us virtually today. Thank you for joining us. And so we like to do the polling questions for the CE, for people particularly who are attending on a remote basis. So polling question here, do you believe your employer experienced some level of fraud at some point during your work experience or your work career? So if you think back, how many think that there may have been a fraud or know that there has been a fraud maybe at your employer or previous employer? Either. We're going to be all inclusive today. So it looked like there was about half. Okay, and we'll assume the other half no, or maybe we don't know. So, pardon me? Yep. So again, about half and half. So one of the things that we have learned in our profession is fraud happens more than we think. And yes, it can happen to you, and nobody thinks it will, but yes, it can happen at your organizations. One of the reports that we like to read in our profession is a report that comes out annually. And it's published by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. And it's a report that they call the Report to the Nations. And it's a very long report, but boy, there's so much good data in it. And so this morning, I think as we work through our session, we'd like to point out some of the highlights of that report, because this group, the Association of Fraud Examiners, they believe that if you study fraud and you understand why fraud and how fraud happens, we can become better at detecting it and mitigating it and preventing it. So this slide here is just entitled Fraud is Big Business, because look at the numbers that are presented on this slide here. This year's study, and it's the 2022 Report to the Nations, it's called, they studied more than 2,000 fraud cases that cover 133 countries with losses of over $3.5 billion. And that's a B, not a million, but $1 billion. So again, huge, fraud is big business. The certified fraud examiners, they estimate that organizations lose about 5% of their revenues on an annual basis, so 5% of your revenues on an annual basis to fraud every year. And based on these 2,100 cases that they studied, the median loss was over $100,000. And the average loss was almost $2 million. So again, big numbers here. Some interesting things that come out of the report. One of the things that we're highlighting here on this slide, and we'll maybe just call this the hotline or the whistleblower slide, because one of the takeaways that you'll have if you read this report is how important it is to have a tip line, to have a hotline, to have some platform or some mechanisms for the employees and for your other stakeholders to communicate with you if there is something that's suspected that's just not right. And again, what this figure shows, and I'm sorry if it's showing up just a little bit small, but the tips in terms of how occupational fraud is detected, tips, 42% is far and away the number one tool we have to detect a fraud. And they use the word occupational fraud in the survey, and all that really means is a fraud that's perpetrated by an employee against the organization. That's the definition of occupational fraud. But 42% come from the tip line. And you can see in the graph to the right there, of course, those are mainly reported by the employees. And we get some help from customers and maybe some vendors and some other stakeholders, but by and large, it's the employees that are tipping us off to the fraud happening. There's a couple other interesting points in the text of this. One is that the losses of companies that have hotlines, the losses that they incur from fraud are about half of those that don't have a hotline. So you can actually decrease the amount of fraud if there is a fraud by having a hotline or a tip line. And they've proven that if you actually do training to your employees that yes, we have a tip line, and maybe it's anonymous, maybe it's not, maybe it's a service, maybe the call goes to someone internally, but the training to employees of how to use that, again, dramatically increases the effectiveness and lowers the amount of the fraud. It shortens the tenure of when there is a fraud. How long does it take to detect a fraud if it's happening? The tenure is shortened. And again, if there is a fraud, you want to have a very short tenure, right? The shorter the fraud, the sooner we detect it, the lower the losses that we're probably going to incur. So the tenure of the fraud, keeping that to a very short tenure is super important. And they've proven that, again, companies with hotlines and tip lines, that's a great way to shorten the duration of a fraud. So again, a couple takeaways from that slide. This slide here, again, some small words on here, but if you focus maybe on those first couple lines, oftentimes there are red flags that are alerting us to fraud when it is happening. And you can see here that 85% of the fraud cases, there was a red flag, some type of red flag present. What are those red flags that we need to be watching out for? Well, again, top of the line here, 39%. People living beyond their means. So maybe, again, just being aware in the workplace, living beyond your means. If every other person is pulling up into the parking lot with a Lamborghini, you may want to question what might be going on there. Financial difficulties is the second one too. So that's very, very common too. So people that are under stress from a financial standpoint, more likely to commit the frauds. So again, there are red flags we need to be watching out for. 85% of the cases give us some type of red flag. This slide here is showing us what type of anti-fraud controls are most prevalent at companies. And again, you can see top three here. We have external audit of the financial statements. We have a code of conduct. We have internal audit. Going down the list, you can see hotline is at 70%. So again, some important things that we can do in our organizations to help combat fraud, give ourselves the most chance to detect it. Again, going through this report in a little bit more detail, what's interesting is these are averages of all the cases they looked at. They actually segregated the frauds by company size, and what they found is companies that have fewer than 100 employees, which is probably most of this group here, so organizations with less than 100 employees, you can probably cut these percentages in about half in terms of the anti-fraud controls that are present at those companies. So again, bigger companies, it's easier to have things like external audits and pay for them, code of conducts, internal audit departments, a good level of management reviews. Bigger companies are more likely to have those controls. Smaller companies are less likely to have those. So if you looked at these percentages here, cut them about in half for companies with less than 100 employees. Yes, Lori?
Rick, are these both for-profit and not-for-profit companies in this study also?
Yes, this is really cross-industry. So this would include for-profit and nonprofit companies and scattered across industries, including real estate, manufacturing, distribution. So again, this report is so thorough, though, it does give some industry specific. It's just the sample size is a little bit smaller. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Claire.
How do they define fraud? What type? There's so many different types of fraud.
Right, and that's a great question. So the question is, how do they define fraud? So typically, frauds can be put in one of two buckets. Generally, we have misappropriation of assets. So that's theft, and usually that's cash. Sometimes it's inventory, but most of the times it's cash. So how do we steal cash? And then the second bucket is usually fraudulent financial reporting. So how do we misstate our financial statements to mislead people? So maybe we're going to inflate our revenues or decrease our expenses. But how do we trick people with fraudulent financial reporting? So those are the two categories that they segregate into. Yeah.
Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
go back to that.
Yeah.
One lead to the other. Why would somebody do fraudulent financial statements unless they were kind of trying to hide cash they had misappropriated?
Oh, there's lots of reasons. Yeah, there's lots of reasons. Yeah. So maybe we have certain kind of ratios we'd like to hit, right? So maybe we don't like the way our program expenses as a percentage of our total expenses look. So maybe we book some journal entries to make the program expenses look a bit higher than they actually are. Or maybe
But how is that going to benefit the individual who's doing the fraud, I guess?
well, in that case, maybe it's someone in upper management, that's trying to impress a donor or a foundation. Yes, right. And sometimes even nonprofits, they may have some bank debt, and maybe there's some covenants in there. And maybe if you calculate the covenants, we don't make it. Well, let's book a couple journal entries. We can automatically improve our covenant ratios. So, yeah. When we talk about fraud, it's good to talk about a tool that auditors use, and we call it the fraud triangle. And some of you may have heard this before. And if you don't know the two faces here on the slide, we'll explain this in just a second. But the fraud triangle is a condition that really increases the chances of a fraud occurring. And so this is a theory that says that frauds are more likely to be perpetrated when three conditions exist. And those conditions are, first, pressure. So is the fraudster under any kind of pressure? Could be financial, could be some type of performance pressure at work, but what kind of pressure is the fraudster under? And then two, do they have the opportunity? Are they in a position where they can actually commit a fraud? So if it's financial reporting fraud, can they book a journal entry and create a fraud? Do they have access to cash? Can they be a signer on a check or a wire and perpetrate a fraud that way? So do they have opportunity? And then the third, which is a little bit hard sometimes to ascertain, is the rationalization. So what is the rationalization behind the fraud? If you've been reading the media reports, if you're a sports fan or even not a sports fan, Shohei Ohtani's been in the news a lot in the last couple weeks because his interpreter committed a massive fraud against him to the tune of about $40 million is what they're alleging at this point. So Shohei Ohtani's probably the best player in baseball right now. He signed a 10-year, $700 million contract with the Dodgers. And he doesn't speak any English, so he has an interpreter. And the interpreter set up his bank accounts. And his interpreter, he's very close to. In fact, a lot of what's been reported, he's viewed as basically a brother to Shohei. So there was complete trust between the two. And Shohei's accountants and lawyers didn't have access to these cash accounts. And furthermore, they didn't speak Japanese. So everything they did was through the interpreter. And so there is the opportunity. The pressure, it's been reported that the interpreter has a voracious sporting gambling issue with betting on sports. And so that's what he was doing. And the good news is he won about $140 million. It's been reported over the last 10 years. The bad news is he's lost about $180 million. So he owes his bookie about $40 million. And so there's the pressure. And so he impersonated Shohei Ohtani, and he paid off his $40 million of debts. Now, when all the news broke, everybody was saying, "Oh, we think Shohei may have bet on sports, and he may have lost $40 million." And again, what's been reported so far is he was completely innocent. Shohei had no idea any of this was going on, and he's cooperated fully. And everybody seems to think he's 100% the victim here. And it was really all about the interpreter doing all the bad stuff. But regardless, he got his name dragged through the mud. And maybe people that don't know the story might hear that maybe he's a sports bettor now, and he's not a good person. And so again, just being connected to the fraud, and if your organization is ever connected to a fraud, there's no good ending here. So again, the importance of creating good controls and creating a good environment. And so let's transition into that. Because if fraud is the villain of the story, the hero of our story is internal control and how important internal control is in our organization. So a lot of people have heard of internal control, and you've probably spoken on the internal controls, but do we really understand what internal control is? And so So we wanted to provide just a little bit of background about what is internal control. And this is really a worldwide accepted model. And what's pretty neat about this model is when we talk to our publicly traded clients about internal control, or our private clients or the nonprofit clients, we all use the same definition. So this really is a generally accepted business definition about internal control. So internal control is not just reconciling bank statements. It's not just reviewing financial statements at the end of the month. Internal control is a process. It's a framework, and it's multi-layered. Usually when we see the internal control definition presented, you might have seen in an article or even a textbook a little cube or a little box. I like this picture better because of where it places the control environment component, which really is an overlapping umbrella. So internal control really means all 5 of these components. And if you have good internal control in your organizations, you have elements of all of these components in there. So first one is control environment. So what is control environment? Control environment is your tone at the top. It's how you conduct your business every day. It's what's in the DNA of your shop. At Haskell & White, we've always had at our firm what we call our operating values. And operating value number 1 is ethical behavior. And that's the number 1 thing that we stress at our firm. And if you violate that, there will be severe ramifications for that, including an up to termination. That sets a pretty strong tone at the top of our firm about your expected behavior. So what is the tone at the top of your organizations, and how are you articulating that to your staff? Risk assessment, super important. So how do you identify risks in your organization? And here we're talking about financial reporting. So how do you identify those risks? How do you assess those risks? How do you respond to those risks? Control activities, that's really where the boots meet the ground. So how do you get cash out of your organization? What are the controls around your disbursements? Wires, checks, who reviews the invoices, who approves them? When you process payroll, who initiates it, who approves it, who can make changes? And if someone makes a change, who can see it? The really day-to-day operations of controls. Information and communication. So do we have the information we need in our organization to make good decisions? Are we getting good monthly reports? Are they coming on a timely basis? How are we communicating the results to the rest of the organization? How do we communicate our expectations to the rest of the group? And the last component is monitoring. So how do we monitor our performance in all these areas? Common tools we see, budget versus actual analysis, right? That's a great tool. Maybe the board at the end of the month reviews a statement of financial position, they reviewed a statement of activities, they're reviewing it with a challenging eye, and then they're maybe doing a budget versus actual comparison to make sure that the financial reporting is strong and accurate. I'll bet you didn't know that when you came here today you were going to get a homework assignment. But I would like to offer a homework assignment to you if you care to take it. One of the great things about the internal control update that we got most recently from COSO, and this came out in 2023, is it gave us what they call 17 guiding principles. And they're listed on this slide here. If you just Google COSO 17 principles, you'll get some nice templates too if you'd like to have a template on it. But essentially what it is, it says if you want to have effective internal control at your organization, then you should have elements of all 17 of these principles. And again, there's a few of them in each of those 5 COSO components that we talked about: the control environment, risk assessment, the control activities, information communication, and monitoring. So give yourself a quiz and see how many of these elements that you have in your organization. And if you have some gaps and you have some holes, see what you can do to fill them up. Because if you have elements of all 17 here, then you're on your way to making a very good internal control environment. Okay, let's take a polling question here. Does your employer have a fraud hotline or a whistleblower platform or outlet that you're aware of? If you do, how about a hand up?
That include a whistleblower policy with someone, a board member that...
Absolutely. That absolutely counts. Yep. And in small organizations, that's sometimes what we have to do, right? We don't maybe want to pay for a third party to maintain it. Let's have a call go to the audit committee chair. Let's have a call go to the board. Yep. Okay. So not quite half. So we might have some work to do. Maybe just one other data point on, again, the importance of the hotline and the whistleblower. Do you know that for our publicly traded companies, our U.S. Securities Exchange Commission, they have an office of the whistleblower. So they want to encourage people that work at public companies to whistleblow if there's an issue, a fraud, something that's suspected at a public company. In 2023, the SEC gave out a record number of awards through this whistleblower program. Anyone want to guess how much money the SEC gave out to whistleblowers in 2023?
Over $1 billion.
Oh, not quite $1 billion, not quite $1 billion. But you're close. It was a record year. It was $600 million. $600 million on 18,000 tips that the SEC got through their Office of the Whistleblower. Record year. In fact, they gave out a record award this year. They gave one group of whistleblowers $270 million this year for whistleblowing. And then again, the company got in trouble. The company had to pay a big fine. The whistleblowers get a piece of that fine. So again, fraud is big business. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about fraud. We've talked about our hero, which is internal control. So I'm actually going to invite Christian to the stage here, and Christian's going to share with us some strategies on, again, how to mitigate some of these risks of fraud.
Thanks, Rick. So what we're going to talk about next is some processes that your organization can put in to identify and mitigate some of, fraud that we have seen. So, right, if you go think back to a slide that Rick threw up, earlier on, about 25% of fraud that's detected is through the reconciliation process, management review, and document review. So, right, what I want to discuss with you is some practices that we can implement that your organization, regardless of size, can do it. But first, what I want to do is talk about another fraud case and how it kind of ties into the Shohei Ohtani one. So, local nonprofit case that just kind of went through the legal system, and what was found was the CEO was using grant money for personal expenses, paying property taxes, private dinners, and other private expenses. So, right, what could that organization have done to help detect it? Similar to the Ohtani case, right? So, right, you have these instances where on service levels, do these organizations have the proper cash controls? What could these organizations could have done to put some process in place to detect it? So, right, we see these is not all encompassing of things that an organization can do, but you know what? These are the 4 most prevalent that we see. So we're going to go through a few of them, and as we go through it, kind of give a few examples of things your organization can do. So first and foremost is the cash controls, right? I think as we're talking about them, is appropriation of assets is kind of most prevalent. It's kind of the thing that most people think about as far as fraud, right? How is money being stolen from our organization? So, right, when you think about, and this is kind of a thought exercise for each of you in the crowd here, is what does your organization currently do? Think about your process currently. How's it set up? Do you have proper approval? Do you have proper setup? For example, for your cash disbursements, do you have someone preparing? Do you have someone reviewing? Are the checks located with just the CFO or just one person, right? Or are the checks being prepared by some person, sent over to the CFO to sign? Does the board look at it, right? So when you think about that process, what would be ideal in that situation, right? In most situations, you kind of see this bullet point on the side, but think about this as a kind of overarching premises here. It's like your control shouldn't be limited to one person, right? If one person has control over the whole entire function, right, that's where issues can occur, right? You look at the Ohtani case. The interpreter had access to the bank statements, cash disbursements, you name it. No one else had access to it. No one could review it. No one could take a look at it. No one could ask the question and be like, what's this? Think about that for your organization. Does your CFO have the capability to make the checks, make the wires, approve the cash disbursements with no approval on their side? So stuff to think about. As I said, so you do the process of kind of setting up to, all right, this is what's going to go out the door. So when it goes out the door, all right, are we doing it through wire ACH? Are we doing it through checks, right? So if it's a wire ACH, right, try to set up an initiator and approver. Most banks at this point, right, will kind of require it. If you prepare it, the controls within the bank will not allow you to kind of prove it. But something to think about, go back to your organization. If you do move money that way, check writing, right? Is the check writing done specifically as in the process, does whoever's approving the payment, are they writing the checks as well? Right, think about, whoever's preparing it, right? You should have a staff, in a sense, to prepare the check, sends it over to the CFO or executive director, or board members are involved with the check process. Someone that is not preparing the check someone that is preparing the check should not sign the check, right? So, right, as you think about this stuff, and it's like, okay, the size of our organization, we don't have the resources for it, we don't have the people for it. So sometimes we gotta some person will have to do multiple tasks, right? That's just a function of some sizes. But so when the next step in this cash disbursement or cash controls is like the bank reconciliation process, right? It's not a catch-all, but it's a good thing to have them done timely, have them done properly, but also have them reviewed in a sense, right? So whoever's preparing it, there should be appropriate level of review. But as it is, most organizations, if you have one person in the finance department or limited people in the finance and accounting department, they prepare it, and perhaps a board member steps in, takes a look at it, but as well as getting access to the bank statements, right? It helps to have both, right? Because you can look at bank rec, and right, those can be manipulated in a sense. But if you can look at the bank statements and kind of see what's going on in there, right? Take that extra step to take a look. Then, don't be afraid to ask the questions, right? You see something that doesn't make sense, unusual, kind of out of the norm. Ask the question, right? And I think that's where, part of that is not only you could detect the fraud, or detect anything unusual, but it allows the people that are preparing to think about it, right? They want to know that people are it's on their radar, it's not going to go uncovered. So, right, having that layer of review, as I said, kind of helps people defer to, doing the tasks that they may have in mind. But so, those are some best, as I said, cash controls, as I said, prepare and review, and the takeaway here, don't let one person have control over the entire function. So moving on, in a sense, to a couple other areas that we see that may be susceptible, but also have some good processes that you guys can put in place. And Rick kind of touched on a few here, but so the payroll, right? Access shouldn't be restricted to just one person, right? Whenever there's a change, whether it's wage change, new hire, termination, right? Employees that can make those changes or approve those changes shouldn't be the ones to make those changes in the system, right? They shouldn't be able to have complete control of that whole process. Right, so what can we do? What can we do? Say, as I said, limited resources, what can we do if one person does do the payroll? They are the HR department. And again, this is where you kind of tap the shoulder of someone on the board in a sense. It's like, hey, what can we produce that is kind of a compensating control in a sense to help us out here, help us review? So one of those things that you can do is ask for any change law reports that come out, right? Any payroll system will be able to produce some type of reporting. And whatever the cadence is that you detect, is it weekly, monthly, whatever it is, but some sort of function after the fact that someone can review and be like, okay, I can look at what happened in our payroll system and approve it or just say, ask the questions, right? At the end of the day, it's asking the questions, be like, okay, this person had a change rate, is approved, and okay, this is how it flushed through the system, we're good with it. But what we, obviously, in the conversation of fraud, it's like, we want to detect stuff that might be, is there a fictitious employee, right? Is there money, is there a change rate or a wage change that really is kind of out of, not in what the organization kind of approves. So, right, then lastly, for payroll, and you'll see it kind of a couple times up here, is the budget versus actual. Again, it's not going to catch everything, but it's another tactic to take where you have a good budgeting process, right? And you look at the variances month over month, and you ask the questions, right? What happened here? Payroll went up. Wait, what's going on here? Well, we normally are pretty consistent across each month. What went up here? We ask the questions. You get the answers, and you said, as many CFOs or directors in here, right? Board members, asking questions and getting the right answers, right? And kind of investigating those answers. That's always the key as far as, digging into when the things don't smell right, ask the questions. Then, the next thing that we see here is kind of manual journal entries, which, right, for those would be the kind of non-routine stuff, not your kind of day-to-day accounts payable, receivables, donations, recording that stuff. This would be the more unique stuff. So how do we detect that? How do we see what's going on there? And so again, there's a theme here, right? It's review, it's asking questions, it's looking at budget versus actual, it's looking at these variances. If you drill down a little bit into this as from a manual journal entry standpoint, right, sometimes whatever your software system, right, can produce those reports. So like as a reviewer, you can take a look you can again look at this report and say like, okay, here's the manual journal entries. Here's not our standard operating procedures. Here's stuff outside usual that a user had to go in there, input, and make the entry. Right, in best case, right, there's a preparer of the entry and a reviewer entry. Again, as a matter of size and resources, that might not always be the case, but there should always be someone on the other end that's reviewing it and approving it, right? That there needs to be eyes on kind of what's going on here. And I said, there's a couple good tactics here, but I guess the overall thing, I keep repeating it, but it's like, if you think of your organization, regardless of the functions that I've talked about, if it's concentrated to one person from a financial reporting, cash disbursement, any cycle that is really relevant to your organization, take a step back and kind of say, all right, are there people or other resources within this firm or leverage people on the board that can separate some of those duties, right? There should be a preparer, there should be a reviewer. That's best case, right? So think about that as you kind of think about your organization. And it's as I said, it's one of those things, right? It takes a little time, takes a little effort. It's kind of extra tasks, but it's for that environment, that control environment that Rick talked about. That's really kind of what needs to be put in place to kind of make sure you're doing what you can on your side to detect fraud or have the best controls in place. So with this said, there's one last thing that I'm going to pass it back over to Rick to kind of give a few examples on.
Yeah, and I think we were thinking that any discussion around fraud would be incomplete without mentioning the word cyber risk, right? And I think most of us in the room, we've been subject to spoofing attacks, phishing attacks. And I think what the studies continue to show us is most of the cyber incidences that we experience, they're really triggered by an internal employee. And it's usually inadvertently tripping on an email or opening an email that they shouldn't have or clicking on a link that they shouldn't have. And how do they look? They look like maybe you'll go back to your computers when you go back to your office, and maybe you'll see a very legitimate looking email with a Haskell and White logo on it. And maybe it'll say, hey, your audit's starting next week. Please click on this link and enter your social security number, Terry. And if you were to look at the email address, maybe you'd see it would come from auditor@hwcpaaa.com. And you say, that looks like Haskell and White. Boom. Right? And so what we would recommend as a best practice is please train your employees. There's so many tools out there that are available, but teach your employees what to look out for. These attacks are increasing in volume. They're not decreasing in volume. So please train your employees, give them the tools to identify those attacks to keep your organization safe. Yes, Terry?
Any email fraud required to have at least a misspelling in it somewhere? No.
Yeah, I don't think so anymore. Yeah.
Because I still have not seen one that didn't have something slightly wrong.
Right, yeah. And maybe the email doesn't say, hi, Terry. Maybe it says, hi, guest. But again, there's some common tools I think that folks will teach you of how you can maybe increase your chance of finding that bad email and not falling subject to that. So, yes, we have some questions.
From a legal and accounting point of view, we're seeing the whole California exempt, non-exempt, and remote employees and being able to identify their IP address where they log in. What are you guys seeing as far as from the state level? Are they addressing that? Because we're stuck. I mean, we're trying to monitor people in remote locations and at home and stuff like that, so we have to be really careful how we tread. But from an accounting point of view, are you seeing fraud or
Wow.
any way to?
No, I'm going to defer. David, will you comment on that?
Sure. We're seeing, people are still leveraging, like, I guess it's not getting picked up. There we go. We're seeing still plenty of requests out there to commonly use IP addresses to note where someone's logged in from. But the truth of the matter is IP addresses can be spoofed and faked, and you buy blocks of IP addresses. So an ISP might have a block of IP addresses that says you're from Orange County, but it's actually been sold and used by someone in South Dakota. So it is a tool that people use to try to identify where you're from, where you're logging in from, but it is not perfectly accurate. So that's something that I always tend to push back on. If someone is trying to say, we require you to leverage IP addresses for location, geolocation, it can be a data point, but it should not be the only data point.
What is an alternative data point?
Having them actually define their login or restricting regional login at the level of, you can set, so if your employees are logging in from home, you can actually identify what their public IP address is. You know, have them go online and go to what's my IP, you know, and define, oh, hey, this is mine. That might change occasionally, but you can identify that and list that in your system on the back end. And that, now you're not saying we identify, you know, California by this IP address. We're saying we know this person's logging in from this IP address. It's on our allow list now. That would be more accurate.
Thank you.
But what if they lock out, like, somewhere from public? You know, instead of you identify the IP, what if they lock somewhere at the public?
Oh, so they're logging in from like a cafe?
Yeah.
Then typically you would have them hopefully use a VPN, depending on what type of environment you're having them log into. And as long as they're logging in from a VPN on a trusted computer, you have controls that you can limit how they get access into your environment. That's a good conversational point, and it's something I'm happy to chat with, you know, after the session too. There's a lot of things you want to look at when leveraging remote employees.
Gerald.
So Rick, almost, I'm sure every nonprofit in this room is seeing more and more their gifts, tickets, and whatnot are coming in online. Going through a separate, I mean, ours come in through GiveCloud. But one of the things we're finding is that there's a lot of trash coming in through there, and we have to be very careful about everything is now reviewed that comes online by two people. Because there are people that will come in and say, we gave you $1,000, we look at it, it's not there. Or it comes in, we had a situation where someone gave us $1,000 and it was a stolen $1,000.
Wow.
So, I mean, that is something that I think we all have to look into more easily, not necessarily our major gifts,
right,
but probably 70% of our total revenue now comes through online.
Yeah, yeah. So the comment Gerald made was 70% of the revenues now contribution revenues coming in through online. And again, the diligence and the vigilance it takes to monitor that and to track that, and don't assume that's because it's coming digitally that it's perfect, because it's not. So great reminder from Gerald. So, okay, keeping with our baseball theme, we're going to bring in our closer. Wayne Pinnell has been warming up in the bullpen. And strategic financial leadership.
All right. This is more wobbly than it appeared up here. So I now have to reduce a 3-hour presentation to about 22 minutes. So I'm going to see what I can do. First thing I want to do is try to tie all the prior presentations into the introduction for mine. So first off, as Rick mentioned at the introductions, I'm the managing partner for Haskell White. And at the high point, I served on 12 boards at the same time. I've cut back a little bit, but it's still 7, one of which is the board of governors at this club, which I'd like to officially welcome you to seeing for some of you the first time. To Diane's point, all that time I've spent serving on those boards, I cannot deduct on my tax return, if only. And then for David, AI, I will say that part of my presentation actually was generated by by AI, an AI tool, and by we, I say Megan, because she did it. She found an outline for me that we worked off of. And then finally, no fraud occurred in the preparation of what I'm about to say. So just to get a quick read on the room as to who's in here, and I should just advance this one slide so we're current. Just to get a quick read of our guest here today. How many of you are executive directors or CEOs of your organization? All right, just a couple. How many of you are in finance? All right, lion's share. How many of you are in fund development? Just a few, all right. How many of you are board members? All right, and then anybody meet the criteria of other? All right. I know we got our auditors and one here. And the reason I do that is partly to look around the room to tailor comments from my side, but the other side is to get you to see that what I'm about to talk about, strategic financial leadership, is a team sport. Keeping with the sports theme, thank you, Rick. It is a team sport. This is not something that we're going to talk about that is me, myself, and I. It's not the right team. You can't go out there and put this together for your organization. You're going to need some help. So a little bit of background here. Polling question. How many nonprofit organizations are in Orange County? How many think it's A, 20,000? All right. How many go with B for 12,000? How many go with C for 9,000? And how many go with D for 5,000? So it's really interesting. We went from a lot of people gradually down as the numbers went down. The reality is there's 9,000. 9,000 nonprofits in Orange County. And I can tell by the nonprofit people in the room that they're like as amazed as I was when I pulled up the stat. Right? So looking this one step further north and south first, San Diego has 12,000. LA County has 53,000 nonprofits. Okay, so strategic financial leadership, recognize that you are competing, even here in Orange County, you're competing with a lot of other organizations for the sources of funding that you get, whether it's donors, grants, government resources of another kind. You're competing with all these other organizations. So I would suggest that the one who has the better strategy might actually fare out better in funding their organization. Now that is kind of a weird stat, right? Because there's a lot of nonprofits that might only have a budget of $100,000 and they're startups. And of course there's nonprofits that are excess of 100 million. So they're much more robust in their overall structure. Right? So a little bit of a refresher hopefully for some, and for those of you that this is all brand new material, we might need to talk. Okay? But a strategic plan or your organization should be based and founded around some basic premises. Okay? There's the purpose, the mission, the vision, and the values. Okay? Rick mentioned one of our value statements. We've got a list of 5 of them. I won't go through ours with you, but everybody should start with a mixture of these items, and these definitions get clouded. You can source this all over the place, and there'll be purposes blended with mission and vision get cloudy, but you need to have these elements in your understanding of who you are and what you are going to be, because it isn't necessarily this is who I am today. You need to think about who you are going to continue to be into the future. So the purpose, simply, I'll paraphrase and I may mix up these on when I say it. Purpose, why you're here. Why do you do what you do? Okay? The mission, what's the business? Who's going to be served today into the future? Where are you going in the vision? And then ultimately values. What do you stand for? Okay? What are those unshakable things that you stand for as an organization, that people working with you as employees, board members, volunteers, that you want to hold them accountable to that, so you're all staying on the same path. And then we have to go down the strategic planning trail. And I apologize for the size of the font, and I also recognize I left my glasses in my car. So we start with, I don't think yours will help. So we start with the strategic planning and overview of it. Obviously, we get past the idea, the purpose, the vision, mission, values, and build into this idea of who the constituents are for the organization. The ones you're going to serve, the ones that are going to fund you today and into the future. It's no better looking down there. Determine your sustainable competitive advantage. How many people have not heard that term before? Well, that's good. We get to that slide next. It'll be easy to go through. All right. So your sustainable competitive advantage, we'll talk more about that coming up. Following on with a marketing strategy, your operational strategy, your innovation strategy. Boy, this is tough. This was fun. And then the people strategy, that's better. And then ultimately, the financial strategy. Folks will oftentimes jump into where's the money come from, where's the money go? and I'll suggest that the financial strategy is the piece that holds it all together. Because if you don't have all these other elements defined, you may not well know what sources you need and how you're going to spend them. Okay? So one of those things we mentioned here on sustainable competitive advantage, it's a statement of who you are and how you're going to beat your competitor, if you will. How are you going to win when there's another organization down the street in the next county or in the next county that does what you do? And I say that cautiously because I'm aware that there are competitors probably in this room. I'm also aware that there's not necessarily complete overlap. I'm also aware that I've been on a number of boards where we have merged nonprofits who have similar aspirations and can work better together. Okay? So the SEA statement usually ends up with words that start with, we will win by. Okay? How are we going to be better than the next? And if you don't have a we will win by statement, and I actually know I have a we will win by statement for our firm. It's in my head. We don't actually broadcast it around, but we've toyed around with it on occasion. But in this idea here for a business or where you are in the nonprofit sector, it has to be something that can be effective. It's got to be authentic. It has to be survivable. The key word here is sustainable. It is not something that's just for today. It's going to go on. All right, so we do have very tiny print here still. Just a little consulting tool we put out to help you figure it out. And I apologize. I don't have my glasses. You won't be able to read this with or without your glasses. It's too small, okay? So this is best done in a group discussion. And the group discussion would start out on the left side, and the key success factors is what things you would define that you think are the must-dos, if you will, that are for your constituents. So in a business, what types of things must you deliver that your clients are buying? Okay, so I'll throw out just one as an example, and I might ask you to throw out a couple others, but you might identify that speed to market is really important. You might identify pricing as being very important. Anybody want to throw out another one?
Consistency of product.
Sorry?
Consistency.
Consistency of your product, consistency, I'll break that up now, consistency of your product, consistency of your people. You want to make sure you divide these up into different themes so that they're not overlapping. Okay, others? Where's Pat?
Deliver what you promise.
Deliver what you promise. Okay, so we do what we say, right? So you run down through this process. The way, sorry?
Reputation.
Reputation, okay. Reputation, brand, any word that works in there. All those things are important. In a group discussion like we just started, obviously we're not going to get anywhere with it. We would list those all out on a board, and then we would subject ourselves to our own rating system. Scale of 1 to 10, which ones are the most important in the value we would be selling to our customer? Nonprofits, the value to the people we're serving. And anything we score less than an 8, we get rid of it. Because we want to really focus on the key thing that's going to drive us. Right? And then we take those remaining, let's just say it's 3. We'll work it out and figure out from another analysis of how it's most effective or how it's going to be most enthusiastic inside our organization. We might boil it down to 1. And you might be able to, from that one clear identifier, this is the most important thing. We need to build our we win statement around that. We will win statement around that. Here's one that doesn't work. Okay? We will win by providing the highest quality and the fastest timeline at the lowest price. What's wrong with that? I see the mouth moving, right? And my partner, Pat, he has this printed out in his office in different words, but you can't get all 3 sustainably. You can get 2, but oftentimes you can only get 1. Fast doesn't come cheap. Quality doesn't come cheap, right? So that's not really sustainable. You can make that argument as a startup company, I'm going to do this faster, cheaper, stronger than the next guy, but that won't be sustainable for a long time. So you want to come up with something that's more leverageable for the long term. Okay, so something like I would submit, we will win by having the top talent to provide solutions to our clients. Okay, so it's really about a knowledge statement in there, getting the people that are going to be able to resolve this. It's focused on one key element that's going to be the driving force to set you aside from somebody else. Okay? So again, I apologize, tiny print, but you get the idea. Okay? So then when you're getting down into the funding strategy, think about where all these possibilities are. And you have both operational needs, of course, as well as capital campaigns or others. Some of you are for service funding, right? So I know there's some theaters and the like, you sell tickets, and your funding comes because you can advertise and get people into the seats. Others of you serve medical or social causes. You're very reliant on different types of funding, some of it government, some of it individuals. David mentioned through the AI, you might have a great donor base, but how many people have been reluctant to go back and ask the same donors for money for 3 different campaigns that year? Right? It's hard to do. You can't keep going back to the same source. So one of the things that's really important in today's world really is diversification. Some programs I've worked with, the government money is drying up. Those grants are going off into something else. We had a host of grants. Some of you were beneficiaries of that, but unfortunately audit victims of that in the past couple of years with the COVID money that was out there. Those COVID dollars are going away. So what's the next deal? Where do you get that money? So it's very important that the fund development people, which is only 3 or 4 of you, you have your focus on who you're going to go to next. What is going to be a funding source relative to the programs that you're putting on? Diane mentioned the gifts in kind. The other way we'd say that on some projects like a capital campaign, it's a budget relieving item. If somebody's going to donate the cement blocks we need to build a building, that just saved us money, but they certainly very valuable to the overall focus of what we're trying to do. And of course, collaborating with other organizations. I've seen this in a number of the clients' reports that we do. I've seen it in others I've looked at. There are organizations maybe in this room that are recipients of money for one program, and they're passing it on to another organization to all work on the same program in a collaborative mode. So how do we get more organizations to do that, recognize they can work together on that? So just a couple tools that we might pull into a strategy session. Not all-inclusive. Obviously, the SCA, we just went through ever so briefly. I hope you're familiar with SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, where, how is a very simple model. I'll actually show that to you on built into the next slide. And OPP stands for one-page plan. And people are like, 1 page? How many people have a binder that has a strategic plan in it? When was the last time you looked at it? Okay. A lot of times, those binders of the past were developed over a period of time. They were put on the shelf. The annual meeting comes up, we're going to do it again. Oh, that's what we were going to do. All right. So I'm going to submit to you a very simple model that does a lot of things. It communicates where you are today, the now. It communicates where you want to be, and you can set some dates there, is the where. And then below that, the action plans are actually the how. The mistake a lot of people make is they know where they are now and they just start creating actions. Just figuring out, I'm just going to do stuff without a focus on where they're headed. And so if you looked at this as a picture, it's now. You look at where you're going and step back and figure out what's missing. It's kind of like gap analysis, right? So the one-page plan will actually have you go through an organization, and I will chuckle inside or outside for you. It oftentimes doesn't stay to this one page because depending on the size of the font you use, you run out of space rather quickly. Okay? But you can use this plan for your entity's overall strategic plan. You get down into 2, and I have one board that we do use this for a nonprofit. It does go to 3 pages, okay? But it gets very granular. You can use it as a sub-plan for any one of the big items you came up with as an action plan. You can use this for your personal goals. Just some place to write it down. So there's a little bit of science to it, gathering that data on the front end. And I actually haven't released this to my partners yet. They'll see it in a meeting we have on May 6th. I have drafted my own succession plan based on this formula. Because I've been the managing partner for almost 20 years. Somebody tells you don't live forever, but you live while you can. So we got to figure out what will happen after the next 5-year term, right? So I've built this out in a plan that only one partner's seen at this point. So, so you can use it for anything, organizationally down to a personal goal. Tying it all together, though, this team I mentioned before is the ED or CEO, the CFO, fund development, the board. All very important to get your team on the same page, working on the strategy together. Clearly defining the roles, clearly defining the governance structure was mentioned a little bit earlier. How frequently do the board meetings go? How frequently do committees meet? How much work is done in the board meeting versus in the committees? And very key, having 100% support of every board member when you're taking on a large project. Okay, so if your fund development strategy is to go raise $15 million for a project, you need to have everybody in not just saying, yes, we support it, but hopefully saying, yes, we support it, and I will either donate or get money donated to this cause. So ultimately, the strategy is going to have components that are not all that crazy, but we're going to have things like the cash flow. Where's it coming from? What do we have to spend it on? Do we have to get financing, short-term or others, to cover gaps? Much like a business. And I don't know about you, but I don't view nonprofits as not being businesses. I don't think, hopefully nobody in this room views their nonprofit as not a business. I think there's a mystique out there that when they say nonprofit means you don't make profit or you can't make a profit. No, you need to be able to be sustainable, generate cash flow in excess of what you're spending so you can go on and do this for another year. And then your reporting modules have to be set up to what you're going to report internally versus board meetings versus externally. And I know many of you, I've just got another email yesterday with the glossy, 6 or 7 page annual report. It's got all the pretty colors and circles where you spent the money. Totally different one than what your audit looks like, right? Hopefully it's got the same numbers in it. All right, so another polling question here, number 8. What is your biggest challenge as a financial leader in strategic planning? A, aligning the budget with strategic goals. You guys all have that wired? That's great, right? Communicating financial needs effectively. Okay. Engaging non-financial stakeholders. Or accessing or utilizing data for decision making. All right, since nobody raised their hand on A through D, I have to assume that everybody's stuck in other, and I've either totally confused you or you have this all wired. All right? You write it down, all right? So just as a summary on this before I give you some closing comments, just remember that you need to engage the team in the financial strategy, and the financial strategy links all the other pieces together. You should be reviewing this annually, if not more often than that, getting input from stakeholders, morphing and changing as your environment changes, and make sure your board and your management team supports it along the way. Okay, so I will make an offer to everybody in this room today. I didn't go very deep on any of this stuff, but I'll offer a free hour to anybody who wants me to take a look at their strategic plan and critique it for them and tell them what you might do differently. And then if you decide to do something differently with the resources of our firm later on, we can discuss that, but I'm not afraid to offer you the free time on the front end. Okay? So you can either leave me a business card, but plan on it, or I did check. Those QR codes on the slides do work. It'll take you right to the V card. Just pull it open, shoot me an email, and we'll figure out a time to get together. Okay? So as we wrap up, we want to be respectful of the time. 11:30 is what we told you, so we just want to make some thank yous in here, but we will hang around, answer some more questions for you on the side. But I do want to thank both Megan and Leah, who worked tirelessly inside the firm to put this together, to get this all here. And so, where's Megan? In the back corner. And Leah's conveniently in the other corner with the headset on, keeping the Zoom people in charge, intact. And then we do have our AV team set up there. I mean, down to microphones, cameras, films. I got to play this back later. We'll have to see what it looks like. It's now history. We can't get away from it. And the Park Club team that was here. Nobody's in the room, I don't think, but appreciate the service that they did this morning. Hopefully you enjoyed their breakfast. And just a quick commercial for the Park Club. For those of you that remember, this is the Center Club. It is now owned by totally different people. It just opened in January. We are still looking for members. And if your organization, may not be your nonprofit, but if you're a board member for something else, if your organization is looking for a private club that can use facilities like this, we have a deal through April 30th. Just a limited time deal. And you have to use my name. There are individual, and corporate structures for membership. But if you use my name and we get you signed up as a member here in short term, you get a $1,500 food and beverage credit to start off, which you can use over time. It doesn't have to be used in one event. And I get a $1,500, and I get a $1,500 credit. So transparency. Someone said that earlier. All right. So final notes here. If you parked in the garage, we apologize, but we can't validate those. We have no ability to do that from the club here. Hopefully everybody, or most everybody here, used the valet, which is free to you today. If you are so inclined, please tip the valets. There is an event evaluation form on your table, the green form. You could either do that manually, or if you go out, especially if you're online, you can click on the QR code. We'd like to get your feedback as we plan future sessions. And if you did say, yes, I need a CPE certificate, see Leah at the back as you leave, and she has those for you all printed and signed and ready to go. So with that, we just want to thank you all for attending, and we look forward to your feedback so we can plan for next year. Thank you.